My name is Tim, and I'm an artist. Hi, Tim. Thank you. So, this is the piece that I have here in this show, and what it is an image of a 3D computer graphic model that I built in a virtual 3D environment. So, this is the current state of my work. This is where I am at the moment. This is literally weeks old. What I want to tell you about is how my process is a mix of these things, is a mix of painting, is a mix of tech and painting and so on. And this is a piece from maybe about a year ago, and this is a photograph that was a still life in my studio that consists of 21 individual exposures that are then post-processed. And so the thing is I came from a traditional artistic background. I was hatched an artist. I've drawn, I've painted, I studied at the University of Kansas. And what I was struck by, I always adored painting, but there was this sense of light that kept appearing to me. And it started to skew me in different directions. It started to push me away from expressive painting, from strictly formalist ideas, and more toward things like systematics. This was one of the last paintings I did. It was probably about 8 feet by whatever. And this was produced by composing ink on water and then monoprinting it on large pieces of canvas. It was another idea around the notion of trying to do something other than just pushing paint around in an expressive way, which I do not mean to say in any ways that it's not a marvelous way to do things. I just started questioning it. A lot of this stuff is sort of stacked up during that time. So what I started doing was working with the idea of systems aesthetics, which is now, some of that's called generative art, I think is the current term. But the notion was, in the case of the rhombus there, a simple color system, and seeing what would happen, but not knowing, just following a system and having a piece emerge out of that. And that's what these other two on this side are. The upper one being basically applying a rule system to a line or a grid and seeing where it goes, seeing what happens. This piece right here is a sculpture, a bas-relief, that was made of planes of silver cardboard that was also constructed in the same way, just out of a system. So the thing that happened next with a friend of mine asked me to do light shows for a rock and roll band. And so the rock and roll band was traveling through the Midwest and into Canada, and what they wanted were graphics that would support the music that they were playing. And so I started doing paintings on glass, small paintings on glass, and I did just gobs of them. I had multiple projectors. I had shutters that were mounted on those projectors that had holes in them that would enable me to turn a projector on and off at variable speeds. And this is around 1969, it's the summer of 1969. And I also was introduced to strobe lights, theatrical strobe lights, which were rare as hell then. The notion about those was that you could vary the repetition rate or the flash rate of the strobe, and in doing that, you could actually divide this continuous motion into individual sections, and that blew my mind. The idea of being able to chop continuous motion up was fascinating to me. So I started thinking about ways of controlling this. How do you do that? Could tech be controlled? Now, I want you to understand, this is way before computers. This is way before any kind of digital technology in any practical way existed. And so I started fooling around with Kinetics. These two pieces were, these were a couple of many, which were kind of like a zoetrope. So they were mounted on a fan motor, and they'd spin at variable speeds. And when they did, I had a variable speed strobe light aimed at it, and I would shoot that light through color gels, and it would cause these pieces of these lines or these planes to actually animate in a way, in a repetitive way, but by using different colored gels, it would change the space of it. And because the light was so bright, the after images alone would fill a room. Yeah, well, I have to say, I think that synesthesia can be learned, because my brain is definitely synesthetic. So I also started fooling around with photography and with producing abstraction by using, calling out choreographing moves in a model and having her move in various ways while the strobe light color was changing. My assistant's sitting right over there. And so I started to again become even more obsessed with this. How do you take light and control it? Can it be made expressive? So I started building light boxes. This first one over here was called Light Machine 1, and this was really humble beginnings. We're talking fluorescent tubes and light bulbs inside a box with a piece of plastic over it so that I could actually create really crude color fields and be able to vary the lighting in those color fields or tint it. And this is the control box, the back of it, which was just some rheostats that were wired together. You guys, I didn't know jack squat about how to do this. I mean, I was using wire that was like primary wire. It was so heavy. It was the heaviest part of the piece, was the wire. This next one, I learned about how to use, how to create a diode matrix. I'm going to have to use some pornographic terminology here. But the thing is that what that enabled me to do was to create color fields that didn't observe a strict line. So I could actually vary or route the manual motion of a rheostat to a non-linear section of the box and create things like that kind of amorphous spot. So that was exciting to me. So I thought, well, I want to make these move. And I didn't know electronics. So I decided I have to learn it. I'm going to have to do it. This is my studio a few years later. I was building these things compulsively. I mean, I just was pretty much out of my brains trying to figure out how this stuff worked. And without any theoretical base, I was just sort of, strumming my way through it. I mean, I literally at one point did make a transformer jump across a table because I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to adopt the same kinds of standard approaches. I was patterning my work on music synthesis. I was creating audio signals and creating ways of controlling those, and in doing that, making pictures or modulating light. A few more years pass, and this is a section, this is Light Machine 3, and this one stood 7 feet tall. It was way heavier than I was, and what it enabled me to do was to divide the audio spectrum up from 20 hertz to 20K, so whatever we can hear, into 24 channels. Each channel could be routed to again, a nonlinear group of light bulbs, and the brightness of the light bulbs was controlled by the volume of that specific frequency. This thing could be tuned like a piano, and it was tuned by this circuit right here. This is a circuit board. I learned how to make those. And so what I was able to do is by tweaking this, I could actually narrow the band or widen the band and made it possible for me to vary these color fields infinitely. Responding to music or audio or voice or any kind of sound. And the interesting thing about this was that if you heard a piece of music that was played by a clarinet, let's say, and the same piece of music played by a piano, because the harmonic content, the timbre, and so on obviously is different, it would look different. I couldn't believe that happened. This is what an oscilloscope, which is the device you use to look into an electronic circuit, will tell you. It's very simple, it's very two-dimensional, but it's also essential to our understanding of what's going on. This is insanity. This is what I saw one day when I was mucking around with a circuit. I went, what? How the hell can this be? It looks three-dimensional. It was moving like as if in a liquid. It was mind-boggling, and I had no idea how it happened. So a little more time passed. So I built Light Machine 4, and what this did was enable me to actually create colored oscillographics. So this enabled me to actually colorize a monochrome electronic tracing of sound. That is a sound. You could hear that. It was not comfortable to listen to. This worked by using a device called a kinetoscope. Basically, it was just a piece of colored acetate spinning at high speed, 6 colors on this wheel. And as this electronic sound developed on the screen, it's changing and moving very quickly. Well, as it does that, a different color passes in front of it. Now, I didn't have a grid anymore. There wasn't a grid involved. I could do anything I wanted. I could make any kind of image I wanted. The upper 3 were earlier attempts at basically making what I called surfaces. So they had a shallower space, didn't have that deep space of the first group. This one at the bottom was called Shep. And what it did was all these things moved. All these things moved in cyclical ways, but they were also moving within a single frame, like within this one area. This may be moving differently than this grouping. And what was interesting is that I could tweak this, and it really became expressive. It really became something that could be almost considered a medium, to those of us who are completely mad. So I started writing music based on visual criteria. I thought, well, there might be a way to have that influence what I'm doing. So actually, I think this was my first solo show with the Lawrence Arts Center. And it was a piece that I chanted and read through a microphone. And these 4 frames are part of the continuously changing presentation, I'll call it, that was going on with my voice. So then I did a performance piece with a choral group, Lux Aeterna. What I did was I took a recording of their performance and I made a videotape of it that was processed through one of my light machines. And then we performed it live. While all this is going on, I have to make a living. In the 70s, I started shooting pictures for people commercially. And this, I have shot everything. What you could throw something out, I bet you I've shot it. And what I've had to do was, it worked out really well because I was able to get into photography and work my way into computer graphics and everything else through this channel. So no, it wasn't fine art, but as Terry Allen says, it ain't art, but it ain't wrong. I got my hands on insanely expensive and almost unavailable software. And so I learned how to do animations. This is like a storyboard of a radio frequency amplifier that's being built. So it actually moves and comes together. This was a kind of a tongue-in-cheek PSA, futuristic PSA that we did about a Coke can that got blasted out of space. And so I was also able to learn in the process how to make photorealistic pictures, how to make something that would fool you. You would think it existed. I could make a photographic image, and this is in the early 90s that we were doing this stuff. Then we'd have the odd character animation. Those are called Burkosaurus. So how did I get a hold of all this stuff? That was one of the big questions. How do you get anybody to give you software? Because I didn't have any money. So what I did was I went, I know, I'll become a pundit. I'll start writing, and I'll start publishing, and I'll get them to give me stuff. I'll get great swag this way. And so that's exactly what I did. I started writing articles, I started calling people on the phone, driving them crazy about their programs and so on. And I got involved, more deeply involved in computer graphics because I was actually included in the development process. People would actually hire me to help them develop software for artists. I was writing books, I was writing manuals, and I was writing articles. And that paid my way. That's what paid my way. So anyway, then came digital photography, finally. Because what's so cool about this is there are no limits. That is a 30-foot by 8-foot mural that's in Kansas City that I did from a photograph. These are light boxes that have glowing prints. I was doing jacquard tapestries for a while, and a pixel it actually corresponds to a thread. I found this wonderful group of very patient people in North Carolina that put up with my craziness and helped me produce these. I want to show you a couple of shows. This is a shot here in this gallery. This was the show that got my work on the wall in this show. So these were prints on paper. So I've done gobs of prints on paper. The interesting thing is there's so many ways that you can present these pieces. When they are virtual, when there's no no physicality between what you make and then how you present it. These are all on satin.
You're printing these yourself?
Yeah, all these I print myself. The big ones I don't. I don't have the equipment for that. So I have different suppliers. There's another installation. This was at the Kauffman Center in Kansas City, and this was at the Arts KC when they had their home office in the Crossroads District. I always love that picture of that girl standing there. How long do I have to stand here? Just shut up. Really. So the thing is that as a photographer, I think, and it's a big pushback, I think, against all the years of shooting cheeseburgers and Kentucky buckets and cars and, everything had to be unfocused. Everything had to be, how? You want it all in focus? Goddamn right, I want it all in focus. I want it all the way from here to East Jesus in focus. And so what I started to do was started to consider these objects as a way to actually create a new language, a different language. So I started really shooting a lot again, just for I guess fun. And I mean, this is a very literal image of a wave, and this one's is starting to become a little more abstract. But it may be obvious to you, it's a beach scene. But this starts to get a little bit away from this. And these are all watery subjects. And I started to develop a way of seeing these watery subjects, or for that matter, the world in general, in a more abstract way. And so these are some examples of some of the photographs that I've produced that start to speak to the idea of painting, speak to the idea of the questions that I had where the definition of painting is starting to warp, is starting to shift for me. There's another one. So I've done a lot of work on location, but where I really enjoy it is in the studio. So what I did was I thought, well, there's all this available stuff out there that I could put together and make a camera that would do exactly what I want. So I basically bolted this stuff together into the camera that you see over here, which has, obviously has a Nikon body, it's got a bellows, it's got a lens out here, it's got a rail, and all these other things that enable me to very precisely move it and very precisely focus it to get the kinds of images that I want. And this is a typical studio shot with, I mean, this could just as easily be a shot of a hamburger because of the way the lighting and the gobos, and there's always gobs and gobs of lights and stuff hanging around, and little gobos and gym cracks and stuff. It's a still life. So I constructed these things in that set, and then I would photograph them very close up in a panoramic way, so that there's like 21 pictures that comprise this, that all had to be composed together. So it's a tiled up picture. This is another one. And so these I take these into post-production in a series of, it's Photoshop based, but there's also other plugins, and spend hours, sometimes weeks, working on each one, tweaking it, and getting it to look the way I want it to look.
Tim, are these last three, are they all layered up like you were talking about?
Yeah, they all consist of about 21 pictures. There's a little bit of variation there, but yeah. And the thing is that this camera made it possible for me to see in a way that I couldn't possibly do any other way. It's Byzantine, I realize, and it's kind of hard to work with, but I can't think of a better way to get these images. And and they have a quality about them that are, I don't know, I guess just chaotic enough for me. I'm not sure. So here's another example. Another one. So then I started about 6 months ago. I thought, I've done some work in 3D. So what would happen if I could take everything that I had in the studio and basically move it into a virtual environment? What, in fact, if that virtual environment was physically based? In other words, based on real world physics. In other words, light is really just like light. It works the same way. It renders or is basically imaged in the exact same way. Well, now you can. So what I found this program, this may be familiar to some of you. It's called Blender. It's free. That's one of the best things it's got going for it for me, but it's also spectacularly capable 3D program, and I've been trained in most of them. This one is amazing. And this is just a simple, just to demonstrate a very simple relationship. But basically what you're doing is you're working with a camera, just like you are out here. You're working with some kinds of subjects, and you'll be able to compose those any way you want. Lights, all those things have the same sorts of properties and the same sorts of hooks, but they've got a lot more. I can work with a ratio. Let's say I could start with 1/10 of a watt or a 1,000th of a watt brightness and go to 1,000,000,000 watts if I want to. There's no limits. You guys, you can think completely off the tracks. Just don't limit yourself. And that's the best part of this. So I started fooling around with, and I'm still doing this. This is all fairly recent work, and it's rough. It's in process. These are frames from an animation that I'm doing where I'm actually flying through objects. And those objects have different properties. And they can have any property at all. They can be reflective. They can be refractive. They can have different kinds of characteristics that make them act differently. So there's just no end to it. And again, these are studies. These studies take several days to a week to do. Some of that has to do with the latency of the process, because it takes a while for a computer to actually produce a picture of that. That's referred to as rendering. And rendering is a whole lot like making a souffle. You guys, if you know how to make a souffle, it's the same idea. What happens is you get the batter, you get the eggs together, you get all the ingredients together. You have to put them in the correct vessel, right? You're at the correct temperature. And you do everything right, and the sucker still falls. Well, that's exactly the same thing that happens here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it crashes. So this is pretty much the deal. I mean, I'm working, I still believe I'm working photographically. I still believe I'm working in a painterly way. I think I'm painting. I think it's painting. I think it's photography. And for that matter, I think it's sculpture. I know this is all arguable, but in my mind, that's what I think of it as. And the best part, I'm not constrained by physicality. I know how to make these pictures insanely large or whatever, and how to present them in different ways. And that's also a huge part of what I think makes up my work. I really enjoy it. So as the saying goes, this is the paint that never dries. Thanks a lot, you guys. Got through that pretty fast.